Hi, and we are back with another database for you today, and that is our beta release of Oracle DB. We are super excited to bring you this very popular database that many of you probably have in production right now. And in the next couple of minutes, I want to show you how bringing your existing Oracle database to Hasura will allow you to ship applications faster with less code. Let's get into it. I'm going to start by going to the data tab here, and I'm going to navigate to this manage section. Now I have no databases currently connected, so I can actually just use the interface here in front of me. And to do the Oracle database, I'm just going to click on Oracle. And with that, I hit connect existing database, and we'll come up here. I'll give mine a simple name here. Mine is going to be the Chinook database that I'm playing with, and I'm going to go ahead and say pasting in my JDBC URL. Once I hit connect database, then Hasura will go out and introspect that database for me, and will find all of the tables and the relationships across that database and allow me to track those so that I have an instant GraphQL API based off of all of those models that I have defined inside of my database. I'm going to navigate to the Chinook database here, and we'll see all of the tables that it's found. I'm going to check this box here in the upper left corner, which allows me to track all of them at once. I could come in here and customize the individual behaviors of how I want to expose these to my GraphQL API, but for now, the way they're called is just fine for me. I'll say track selected, and with that being done, we'll now come down to the foreign keys, and we'll see all of the relationships that are defined inside of my database. We'll do the same flow where I select this checkbox, I'll hit track selected, and with that being done, we now actually have a complete GraphQL API based on Oracle. No, really, let's have a look. I'm going to go to the API here. I'm going to go ahead and have a look, and we'll see all of my tables are now exposed here at the top level. If I were to come in here and look for something like album, and from album I want to go ahead and look for something like the title, and then maybe the artist, and then I want to look for something like the name of the artist. If we go ahead and run that, we'll see that we can actually get a result of all of those database entries right there inside of our API. Our GraphQL API is ready to go based on Oracle DB. All right, now before we go any further, I want to have a look at this graphical interface and really about GraphQL more in depth with you, because this is a critical part to understanding how the Hasura interface actually works. Now, if you're brand new to GraphQL, this is the part you're going to want to be listening to, because this is going to explain really what everything else is going to be compiling down to at the end of the day. So I'm going to paste in a GraphQL query, and this is going to help us understand a little bit what's happening. So this query here is essentially mapping to our relational model here inside of Oracle. I have an artist table that has a relation to the artist albums table that has a relation to the album tracks. These are effectively running joins across the tables. And I've passed in limitations on these so that I'll only get 3 artists, of those 3 albums, and of those 3 tracks. And then I'm adding in additional functionality that Hasura is providing, and that is this base layer aggregation, where I'll actually be able to get in the count of each of those things. So while I may be only receiving 3 items, I'll get a different aggregate count. This is really basic functionality, and it makes working with our data very neat. Now, what we're seeing now is the GraphQL query language. GraphQL itself is actually a number of different pieces, one of which is a specification for how servers should function. Because it doesn't actually matter which technology you write the server in, GraphQL specification only says how that server should behave. When you normalize server behavior, it allows lots of different kinds of GraphQL tooling to work across GraphQL providers. Part of it even makes things like GraphQL Mesh Federation even possible. So as long as your GraphQL provider is spec compliant, you'll be able to leverage a lot of the great tooling such as this graphical interface here. Now, this is a query here, and so I'm going to go ahead and run this, and what's going to happen is Hasura is compiling that GraphQL into what the underlying data source is wanting to create a very effective and very performant query against the database. We can see how quick that actually was. It's able to read and get that data very quickly. What's also nice about this is that the response is matching the shape of what I've requested. I've been able to limit down the number of fields that I want to just what this specific preview-like query would be doing, and I'm not getting back any extra data. No matter how wide my table is, I'm getting just the data from the server, from the database, only utilizing from the database what it is I'm asking for. And that's a really powerful way to work with our data. Another nice piece about this is that I'm not having to learn some new kind of SQL. Even though Oracle holds a pretty strict approach to the SQL implementation, I could be having to add in Snowflake or BigQuery or some other data source. And instead of having to learn a bunch of different ways to read from my data, I'm able to just learn GraphQL and have a complete picture of my entire data ecosystem. And that's a very powerful way to build. Now, beyond just reads, we actually have mutations as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add one of those. And here with this mutation now, I'm able to actually do my updates, my inserts, my deletes, and I run this now, and we'll see that I'm able to actually insert new data into my database as well. So learning this simple syntax allows me to have an entry point to all of my data, and layered with Hasura's powerful permissions and everything else that we provide, you have a very terse syntax that's descriptively describing your data and gives you access to your entire data ecosystem. And that really is a powerful thing. Now, once you're here inside of Hasura, there's a couple of other tricks that you may not know if you're new to Hasura. So not only can I just bring in my Oracle database, I can bring in other data sources as well. Let's have a look at a few of those now. I'm going to bring in another database. This one's based on Postgres, and I'm going to create a join between these two databases so that I have a federated set of APIs across these two databases. I'll come down here, I'll choose my Postgres database, and from here I'm going to go ahead and call this one playbacks as it represents the user data for my API. I'll hit connect database, and again, Hasura is going to do its bit where it goes out, looks at the schema, finds me all the existing data in there. I'm going to go ahead and just track those two data sources, the same that we did with Oracle. And we'll do the same thing for the foreign key relationships as well. And now I have two databases with GraphQL APIs sitting on top. Now, what I want to do is create a relationship between these two databases. To do that, I want to make a relationship from my playback to the actual Chinook database itself. So I'm going to go ahead and say there's a relationship to a remote database. In this case, I'm going to call this the track info, which represents the full information for one of these playbacks from one of my users. I'm going to choose the playback source, and I'm going to go to the Chinook track table. I'm going to make this an object relationship, and I'm going to go ahead and say from the song ID of my playback, I want to track that with the track ID of the track itself. We'll go ahead and say create relationship. And now if I come into my API, I'll be able to now browse starting from my playbacks. If I look at the track info, we'll see that that field now exists from the one database into the other, where we get all the information such as the album and everything else that we could possibly want. Well, that's great for databases. Now, not all of our data sources live in databases. Let's go ahead and bring in our existing GraphQL API. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the remote schemas here, and I'm going to go ahead and connect a new remote schema. And in this case, I've defined this URL as an environment variable. I'm going to call this my CMS. My environment variable here is called CMS URL, and it's at a / GraphQL path. I'm going to go ahead and say add remote schema. And now we actually have my existing GraphQL API brought in to the rest of my data. Now I've added my CMS data into the rest of my API, and we support creating relationships between many data sources and remote schemas as well. Now, many of you also have microservices or existing REST endpoints that you want to bring into your API. We have support for that as well by coming up here to this actions utility. And if I come into here, I can go ahead and say create action, and this will allow me to define some custom data. I'll fill this out and we'll talk about what's happening. Okay, I've defined a REST endpoint to bring into my existing API here, and that is where I've now said that I want to call this playback utility, this playback field, as a mutation, and I want to go ahead and allow this to be taking in the playback ID. I've defined where it's going to be handled again using an environment variable plus a local path, and then I've told this to be a post request and then just hit save. In this case, we're not showing you what the environment variables are actually called because security is a win. Anyways, now we have REST APIs built into the rest of our GraphQL API. We've brought in foreign remote schemas, we've brought in REST APIs, we've brought in an Oracle database, we've brought in a Postgres database, and there's many more functionalities that Hasura can do. We have the ability to trigger events based off of data capture in different databases. We have the ability to do monitoring to see how the actual performance of our GraphQL API is. We can set limits on depth. We can set limits on which allowed queries can come through. Everything you would expect from a production-grade GraphQL API, you get out of the box with those just couple of clicks. The last piece I want to show you, if you're totally new to Hasura, is our ability to have permissions. I'm going to come to this playbacks, and I'm going to go ahead and say underneath permissions that there can only be the case of a user allowing to select their playbacks in the specific condition where the user ID of that row happens to match in an incoming header called Hasura user ID, something we might strip off of a JWT. We'd allow them to select any specific columns we would want. We could say some things they have access to, some things they don't have access to. And with that, we could define a permission and have a fully fine-tuned API with permissions, caching, and all the performance functionality you would expect. Under the hood, Hasura takes all of these kind of configurations we define, and it converts that incoming GraphQL request into the SQL statements that these underlying data sources need to be able to fetch from the database. In the process, handling our N+1 concerns, creating very performant requests, and allowing us to avoid writing any resolvers by hand, just focusing on building our application. We hope you've enjoyed this quick sneak peek of our Oracle DB launch. We're excited to see what databases you bring in. And if you have any questions, you can find us on Discord. You can reach out to us and the rest of our community. And we have a community call happening every month, last Thursday of the month. And we'd love to see you there. Have a great one. Bye.